Welcome to Libyth. I'm glad you're here. Today we begin a series on one of the strangest, most alive, most quietly radical books ever written. A book composed by a woman in 10th century Japan, in the years around 990 CE, in a court that glittered with ceremony and hummed with danger. And that has never stopped being readable, never stopped feeling immediate, never stopped feeling like someone is leaning toward you in the dark and telling you something true. The book is called The Pillow Book. The woman who wrote it is Sei Shōnagon. And before we are done with her, across 7 blocks of this series, I think you will understand why she matters. Not as a historical artifact, not as a curiosity, but as someone who solved a problem that we are still failing to solve, which is how to make a life legible, how to turn the texture of daily existence into something that another person can feel. Let me start with an image. It is night in the Heian Imperial Palace. The year is somewhere in the 990s. A woman sits in her quarters that are beautiful, cramped, regulated, and surveilled, and she is writing. She is writing not to report, not to argue, not to narrate. She is writing to notice. She is writing down the things that make her heart beat faster. And then, because that list is done, she is writing down the things that are hateful, the things that are embarrassing, the things that lose something when you paint them, the things that a person can do that are unforgivably graceless. She is writing fast, or slowly, or in stolen minutes, and when she is done or when she pauses, she puts the notebook under her pillow. The title, Makura no Soshi, which we translate as the pillow book, is not metaphorical. The pillow is where she hid it. The pillow is where private thought went when the court was watching, which was always. There is something almost unbearably human about that image. The notebook under the pillow. The writing that was not supposed to leave the room. And yet it did leave. It circulated. It was copied. It survived 1,000 years. It is sitting with us now. And the question of how and why it survived is inseparable from the question of what it is. Because the pillow book is not a novel. It is not a diary. It is not a philosophical treatise. It is not a political document. It is all of those things and none of them and something else entirely. Something that, when you try to name it, keeps slipping out of the categories you reach for. The Japanese have a word for the form it belongs to, zuihitsu, which means following the brush, which means you write where the thought takes you, which means there is no predetermined destination, which means the form itself is an argument about what writing is for. Sei Shōnagon arguably invented zuihitsu. Or she perfected it so completely that the invention and the perfection are impossible to separate. What she produced is a book of fragments, lists, scenes, reflections, observations, held together not by a plot, not by a thesis, but by a voice. A voice so specific, so fully realized, so relentlessly present, that reading the pillow book is one of the few experiences in literary history where you feel that the gap between you and the writer has simply closed. She is not historical. She is here. She is noticing something and telling you about it and waiting, with a very slight edge of impatience, to see whether you are refined enough to understand why it matters. And that slight edge of impatience is where this series begins. Because Sei Shōnagon's book is not just a beautiful object. It is a machine for doing something. It is a machine for converting attention into authority, for converting the texture of daily life into a kind of power, for surviving in a system that offered her almost no formal mechanism of survival. She was not highborn enough to be secure. She was not male enough to hold office. She was not imperial enough to be sacrosanct. She was a woman of the middle nobility, the daughter of a provincial governor, employed as a lady-in-waiting in the court of an empress who was already losing the political game when Shonagon arrived. The court she describes was already in the process of being dismantled. The world she loved was already ending. And she wrote it all down, and the writing is so extraordinary that the world it describes did not disappear. It persisted in her sentences, and here we are, 1,000 years later, reading them. This series has 7 blocks. This first block is the introduction. The second block will give you the social and political context, the Heian court, how power worked, what the rank system meant, who the Fujiwara were and why they mattered, why Shonagon's class position is the key to reading everything she writes. The third block has 3 parts: the structure of the book itself, the characters who move through it, and the question of what it means literally versus what it means figuratively. What is this book doing underneath its surface of wit and beauty? Then we have 2 blocks on the 5 major themes of the book, which are the themes this series is organized around. Those 5 themes are everyday observation as art, status anxiety and social comparison, wit as social capital, subjectivity and personal taste, and micro-judgments of others. These 5 themes are not separate. They are 5 different angles on the same problem. They are 5 different strategies deployed by the same person to survive the same situation. And the last block is a conclusion, an attempt to say what the whole thing adds up to, why it still matters, what Sei Shōnagon understood about human experience that we keep having to relearn. Let me plant those 5 themes now briefly, so you can hear them accumulating as the series develops. Everyday observation as art. This is the claim that noticing a particular kind of morning light, or the behavior of someone who has stayed too long at a party, or the specific quality of silence after snow, that noticing these things carefully enough, with enough precision and enough honesty, is a form of artistic production. Not background, not color, not illustration. The thing itself. Shonagon writes about a screen door left ajar with the same quality of attention she brings to a formal imperial ceremony. And the implication is that these 2 things are equally worthy of attention, which in the literary culture she inherited was not obvious and was possibly radical. Status anxiety and social comparison. Shonagon occupies a position that is high enough to observe everything and not quite high enough to be safe. She is always one bad poem away from embarrassment, one political shift away from irrelevance, one powerful man's displeasure away from being sent home. The entire book is written in the tension of that position, performing confidence while radiating, just below the surface, the anxiety of someone who knows exactly how conditional her place is. This is not a flaw in the book. It is the engine of the book. The wit and the precision and the relentlessness of the observation all come from that place. Wit as social capital. In the Heian court, cultural competence was not ornamental. It was the currency. The ability to produce the right poem at the right moment, to respond to an unexpected aesthetic challenge with the appearance of effortlessness, to know not just the classical Chinese references, but the exact moment at which to deploy them. This was how you survived. This was how you rose. This was, for a woman with no formal power, the only form of leverage available. Shonagon is the greatest practitioner of this in the literature of her era, and she knows it, and the book is partly a record of her knowing it. subjectivity, and personal taste. Shonagon does not explain or justify her preferences. She declares them. I prefer this. That is wrong. This is correct. The form of the list is the form of the declaration. She is not building an argument. She is asserting a perspective. And the assertion itself is the act of authority, the claim that her particular angle of vision has value, that what she prefers is worth recording, that the first-person singular is a legitimate literary subject. This is something we take completely for granted now, and it was not obvious then, and it is one of the things that makes the book feel so modern. Micro-judgments of others. She notices everything. She forgives almost nothing. The person who arrives too early, the person who misquotes a poem, the person who laughs too loudly, the person whose robes are the wrong shade for the season. All of these people are catalogued, assessed, and usually found wanting. There is cruelty in this, and I am not going to pretend there is not. But there is also something else, a ferocious investment in the quality of human behavior, a refusal to pretend that how people behave doesn't matter, a kind of moral seriousness disguised as aestheticism. The judgment is relentless because the standards are high, and the standards are high because the world she is defending, the world of refinement and beauty and wit, is perpetually under threat from people who don't understand it. All 5 themes connect. They are all the same argument, made from 5 different directions. The argument is something like this: attention is not passive. Noticing is not innocent. What you see and how you see it, and what you choose to record, these are acts of power, acts of survival, acts of meaning-making in a world that will otherwise make no meaning for you. Sei Shōnagon had no formal power. She had the notebook under the pillow. She turned the notebook into something that outlasted every courtier who outranked her. That is worth understanding. Before we go any further, let me say something about why this series exists and what we are trying to do across these 7 blocks. We are not going to summarize the book. We are not going to give you a plot, because there isn't one. We are not going to give you a character study, because the characters in the book are less important than the consciousness that observes them. What we are going to do is read the book carefully, really carefully, carefully enough to hear what it is doing underneath what it is saying. And we are going to try to understand what it means that a woman in 10th century Japan produced something so singular, so ahead of its time in so many ways, and so utterly recognizable to any person who has ever kept a journal, ever made a list of what they love and hate, ever tried to hold on to a moment by writing it down. The personal essay tradition, Montaigne, Woolf, Baldwin, Didion, every blogger who has ever tried to make sense of their own experience, is, in some deep way, downstream from this notebook under this pillow. The listicle, the hot take, the thread about your aesthetic preferences, all of it has a genealogy, and the genealogy runs through this woman, sitting in the dark, writing about the sound of rain on a roof and the precise quality of embarrassment when someone misquotes a poem in your presence. She is the origin of a tradition that has become the dominant mode of personal writing in the contemporary world, and almost nobody knows her name. We are going to fix that. One more thing before we move on. The Pillow Book is often described as a book about nothing. And I understand why. There is no grand subject, no historical event at the center, no system being described or dismantled. But nothing could be more wrong. The Pillow Book is about everything that matters. It is about beauty and how to find it and hold it. It is about power and how it operates on bodies and minds and relationships and daily life. It is about survival and what you do when the formal mechanisms of survival are closed to you. It is about time and how it moves, and what it means that the things you love are always already dissolving. And it is about attention, about what it costs to pay attention, what it gives you, and why some people, faced with that cost, decide it is worth paying every single day of their lives. Sei Shōnagon decided it was worth paying. We are going to find out why. This is only the beginning. Block 1 continues next, and it will take you inside the world that produced this book. The Heian court, the rank system, the Fujiwara dominance, the political collapse that haunts every beautiful sentence Shonagon ever wrote. See you there. That's all for today on Libyth. If you want to follow the whole journey, subscribe, a new book every week.